There is a version of you that only shows up when you're alone, and there's a version of you that shows up in relationships. If you're willing to look honestly at the gap between those two versions, something usually surfaces that you've probably avoided naming. Alone, you have clear opinions, distinct tastes, a rhythm to how you move through your day that belongs to nobody but you. In a relationship, something shifts, not into dishonesty, exactly, into softness, into accommodation. Your interests start leaning toward theirs. Your opinions start bending toward whatever keeps things easy. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to tell where you stop and they start. Sometimes you catch it happening in real time. You hear yourself defending a belief you never actually chose, or realize you haven't done something you used to love in longer than you can remember. Underneath that noticing is a specific fear, not of losing them, but of what it says about you, that maybe there wasn't much of a you there to begin with. What follows isn't a lecture about weakness. It's a real look at where this pattern comes from and why it tends to show up in people who are unusually capable of connecting people, who simply never had the conditions to build a certain kind of steadiness. Start with a concept from family systems theory that captures this better than almost anything else out there. Psychiatrist Murray Bowen called it differentiation of self. It isn't independence, and it isn't emotional distance. It's the ability to stay closely, genuinely connected to someone while still holding on to a stable sense of what you think, feel, and value. High differentiation looks like being fully present with someone without dissolving into them. Low differentiation looks like the opposite. The closer you get, the more your identity gets built by the relationship instead of from the inside. Decades of clinical research since points to something important. This isn't a fixed personality trait. It's shaped heavily by the family you grew up in. Kids raised in homes where disagreement was tolerated, where you could hold a different opinion than your parents and still be loved, tend to develop this steadiness naturally. Kids raised in homes where separateness felt dangerous, where a parent's anxiety demanded agreement, where difference triggered withdrawal or conflict to learn something else. That being distinct is risky. That closeness only feels safe when it's merged closeness. And that lesson doesn't stay in childhood. It travels into every adult relationship that follows. There's a related idea worth pulling in here. Pediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott wrote about the false self, what happens when a child's authentic reactions are consistently met with disconnection instead of acceptance. The child adapts, learning to sense what the environment wants and produce that instead of whatever's true internally. This isn't manipulation. It's survival wearing the mask of attunement. The child who becomes best at this grows into an adult who can read a new person almost instantly and start shaping themselves accordingly. The relationship that results feels warm and real. It's just built on a foundation. The authentic self never got to lay down. Family therapist Salvador Minuchin's research on enmeshment adds another piece. People raised in family systems with blurry emotional boundaries, where everyone's feelings bled into everyone else's, where individual identity was quietly subordinate to family unity, tend to grow into adults who are extraordinarily attuned to others, and just as prone to losing their own edges around them. This isn't a conscious choice. It's the shape their attachment system decided love had to take. When you show up distinctly, some old internal alarm reads it as a threat to the bond. Merging feels like closeness. A boundary feels like distance. The cycle keeps running not because something is broken, but because it's doing exactly what it was trained to do. Psychologist Patricia Papernow named something she called The merger fantasy. The quiet belief that real closeness requires giving up separateness altogether. That love is measured by how thoroughly you rearrange yourself around someone. The tragedy isn't just what this costs you, it's what it costs the relationship. Someone who genuinely loves you isn't looking for a mirror. They're looking for you, the particular, occasionally inconvenient person who existed before you started shrinking to fit. When that person vanishes, what's left is someone loving their own reflection back at them. A quiet kind of lonely most people doing the merging never realize they've created. There's a physiological layer too. Psychiatrist Daniel Siegel describes a healthy sense of self as depending on integration, the brain's capacity to link different parts of experience while keeping them distinct. Integration is what lets someone stay close to another person without being swallowed by them. When early environments don't support that, when a child's internal signals are routinely overridden, the neural groundwork for staying steady under emotional pressure doesn't build as solidly. The self isn't missing. It just never had the conditions to consolidate. Here's the practical takeaway. If you lose yourself in closeness, it isn't proof you have no self to lose. It's proof that the self you have never got the specific training to stay intact under the pull of intimacy. That skill isn't something you're born with. It's something built, and it can still be built now, under different conditions than the ones that failed to build it the first time. You're not incapable of staying yourself in love. You're someone whose system missed a lesson. And lessons, unlike character, can be learned late. So what does building that capacity actually look like? First, keep small, non-negotiable pieces of yourself alive inside the relationship. Not as a statement, not as a fight, just a you. In habit, taste, or opinion you hold on to because it's actually true of you. Think of it like keeping one hand on the wall in a dark room. You don't need to announce you're doing it. You just don't let go of the contact. Second, learn to notice the difference between real influence and quiet adoption. Real influence feels like recognition. This is actually true for me now. Adoption without resonance feels slightly hollow, like performing agreement you don't fully feel. You don't need to reject everything that came from the other person. You just need to learn to tell which parts are genuinely yours. Third, and hardest, practice disagreeing with the expectation that the relationship will survive it. The fear driving all of this is almost always a fear of disconnection, that being visibly, distinctly yourself will cost you the bond. The only thing that dissolves that fear is direct evidence against it. So run small experiments. State a preference that doesn't match theirs. Hold an opinion under mild pushback. Ask for something that serves you, not just the relationship. Stay present long enough to watch the connection hold. Most relationships worth keeping can hold two whole people instead of one person and a mirror. And the ones that can't are telling you something true about themselves. Here's what's worth carrying out of this. Disappearing into relationships isn't proof that you love too much. It's proof that somewhere early on, you learned that being fully yourself was expensive and that the safest way to keep someone was to become whatever they needed. None of that is true in a relationship that's actually healthy. In a healthy relationship, you're the point. The specific, particular, occasionally difficult version of you is exactly what's being chosen, not the smoothed-over accommodation standing in for you. Learning to stay present in love without vanishing into it isn't about becoming harder to love. It's about finally becoming available to be loved as the person you actually are, which is the only version of love that ever really lands. So tell me, in your closest relationships, what's usually the first thing you notice slipping away? The opinions, the habits, the friendships? the time that used to just be yours? Whatever goes first is usually whatever was accepted most conditionally, earliest. And that's exactly where the real work begins.